The Mobius candidate.
Yeah. So you remember at the press conference when Ben Carson announced that he was coming out for Donald Trump after Carson was out of the race. Carson said, there are two Donald Trumps. And Donald Trump said, yeah, there are two Donald Trumps. And then later in the press conference, he said, no, there aren't two Donald Trumps. So there are two Donald Trumps on the question of whether there are two Donald Trumps.
Three, it might be three. It might be three Donald Trumps there.
But again, if I as a voter think he's speaking to the larger truth, and I think when he's in the Oval Office, he's basically going to be fighting for me roughly, then you let stuff slide. Then you let stuff slide. I mean, that was true. That's been true in one way or another with politicians all along. But he was, again, surprising. Think about how badly he beat the competition. This was the strongest field if you looked at just experience and political success. Scott Walker had done amazing things in Wisconsin in terms of the conservative message and surviving a recall election.
There was a lot of talk that it was a very deep bench this year for the Republicans.
And Donald Trump beat all of them badly. I mean, he didn't just squeak by.
No, the word spanking comes to
mind. New York values. So that's a pretty amazing thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but it is.
I don't know. We all got
I guess here, just in terms of the sense of surprise, that he would have been able to best them all.
There was never a point at which I don't think he was the leading candidate, starting from
when he was not
in the poll of polls, like so in the average of polls, starting from like July or something, he was leading the entire time. And every time someone would say, well, he's not going to last, I would just look back and say, well, who was in that position every other time before? That part is very predictable, because whoever's in that position is always the candidate. The person who is the odds-on favorite in terms of the polls consistently all fall is always the guy who gets it. Or woman, but of course. But
in Republican politics, remember, we'd seen that Queen for a Day thing in the last cycle, where 1 minute it's Bachmann, 1 minute it's Kaine, 1 minute it's Santorum, and so there was a lot of analysis, perhaps even by me, that he would come cycle through, and then somebody would cycle in. I mean, for me, if you're writing the lead of the whistle stop, whenever it may be written about this race, is that Donald Trump and Jeb Bush announced their candidacies on adjacent days. Everybody was down covering Bush in Miami-Dade University. It was an audience that represented the new electorate, the electorate that the Republican Party had written about in their autopsy after the 2012 campaign. He spoke Spanish. He was a candidate of this future coalition. Nobody was covering Donald Trump. And then very shortly thereafter, Trump was at the top of the polls and hasn't been, in the Republican side, hasn't slipped from that spot.
I'll give you an example of how poorly I read the situation. Jeb Bush announces, and we think, oh, we'd like to have a Republican on the very first show. Let's have Jeb Bush on. He's clearly going to be the nominee. We'll have a nice relationship with the person who's going to be there for the next year. Donald Trump announces, and we're not on the air for months. And we raced, I got a camera, and we started doing jokes and putting them on the web because we wanted to get our Donald Trump jokes in before he evaporated in a hail of blood. When he finally hit the campaign trail. I couldn't have been more wrong about what was going to happen.